The best part of the football season? Checking out the post-game stats. Which wideouts scored more than 2 touchdowns? Which quarterbacks threw for less than 350 yards? Think you can pick who will do what before kickoff? Then play Pick 6 from DraftKings, an official daily fantasy partner of the NFL. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app, select between 2 and 6 players, and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat. It's that simple. And for all our first-time Pick 6 players, check this out. New customers, play $5 on your first pick set, get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use code BALLERS. That's code BALLERS for new customers to play $5 on your first pick set and get $50 in Pick 6 credits only on DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. 1 per new customer. Non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits expire in 6 months. Limited time offer. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
The DFS Studio is brought to you by DraftKings. Welcome to the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast with your hosts, Kyle Borganoni and Matthew Betz.
Welcome in. It's Tuesday, October 8th, here on the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Borganoni, and I am joined, as always, by Matthew. He's employed not like Robert Saleh Betz.
Oh, man. Taking shots at the opener, Kyle. Come on, dude. Yeah, we actually just got that news, 4 minutes before we clicked record here on the Tuesday show. So, yeah, Robert Saleh is out. We were talking pre-recording. It feels like it's either Rodgers or Saleh, and obviously they're not moving on from Rodgers. So, see you, Robert. And now we move forward. I think by the time you're listening to this, you might know where Devonta Adams is going. I feel somewhat strongly that this move correlates with hey, Devonta, come over to New York. You know, Aaron Rodgers is now the new, air quotes, head coach here, running everything, doing whatever he wants. I think his boy will be in green in a matter of days.
I do have a couple quick thoughts. You know, we're going to get to discussing this past week for DFS, cash, moving forward to week 6. But yeah, you know, my first reaction is something that we've talked about a little bit. We talked about it this weekend, but like the entire vibes for the team is, are you guys having any fun this season? It doesn't feel fun. It feels very anxious. And Robert Saleh is just another check in the box of, hey, it's okay if you're just a defensive coach, not a head coach. And in general, if you just kind of look at the last 10 years, right? If you are a defensive head coach, it has not gone well for you because you have to kind of keep switching through offensive coordinators. And if they're really good, they move on. But in general, it's just not been a great move in the NFL. DeMeco Ryans is probably one of the few. Mike Vrabel is maybe the other name that comes up. But yeah, hires like that, I feel like if you don't have the right culture, it just sucks, man. Like all the fun is sucked out of watching Jets games.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, like Brees was the 5th overall pick in redraft leagues or whatever this year. Like, you know, it's not even like fun watching him right now. So yeah, maybe this move changes things for New York in just terms of shake it up in the middle of the season and see what's going on. It's sort of interesting that the move happened when it did because the AFC East is wide open with the Miami Dolphins, you know, injuries with Tua and stuff. They've fallen off a cliff. The Bills look not great right now. Obviously the Patriots are not in it. So it's interesting that they made that move when the division is wide open. The playoffs are still a possibility. Oftentimes teams will make this move when like the season's gone, the locker room is lost, you know, they're 1-6, like it's time to just switch gears. So it's interesting timing, but we'll see what it does for the on-field performance for the Jets this week. They have a huge game. It's Monday night, right? Against the Bills, I think it is. So that's a huge divisional matchup coming up this week. We'll see how they respond.
Yeah, right now the line is Buffalo -2.5 on Monday night. That should be an interesting one. But I think just overall, we talked a lot about the Jets, and I've talked a lot about Rodgers, talked about on the Dynasty podcast of just there are so many things that have to go right. And I think people just kind of assumed with Rodgers, oh, he's going to overcome it. Fantasy purposes, real life NFL purposes, it's been pretty rough. But on this show, we will get to talking about our cash process from this past week. I will get to share some pain, just as close as you could possibly get, and then share some listeners who won, and then we'll move on to week 6 and talk about the main slate. I did have one little bit of announcements at the top of the show. We don't really do announcements. That's kind of like the main show. They just kind of like, follow this, do that. Just all that stuff.
Right.
I listen to every podcast. I'm live for every podcast. I always tune out there. But you need to tune in right here because we have a special guest on Friday's podcast. Every year I take a little trip with my family, and I will be gone this weekend. But Betz, tell the people what's up.
Yeah, so you'll be gone this week, so it's nice for you to be able to unplug, hopefully. And in your replacement, I think I'm taking over the host role this week, which is absolutely terrifying for the production of this show. I mean, what could go wrong? For those that don't know, I'm not the most sound technology person in the world, so apologies in advance. But we will have Pete Overzet on this week's show on Friday to talk through the slate with me. Pete is super sharp, one of the best ball minds in the space, one of the best DFS players in the space. So I'm excited to get his perspective on things. I know he's a big tournament player, so I'll definitely rely on him for some of those takes and hopefully give everybody the content they need to win all the money in week 6.
Yeah, and Pete has a great newsletter that I've subscribed to for a long time. I'm also a fan because I hate that I won't be on this one because Pete is a reader. He's a big-time reader as well. Picked up a couple books this summer that I got to read because of Pete. But so that'll be good for Friday's show. Pete's with Fantasy Life. You've probably seen his name all over, but should be an awesome show. And I actually will listen on my drive back. I bet I'll listen. I'm not going to play this weekend. I'm going to remove myself. I think it's just a good plan because I will just end up spending money that I don't need to.
Yep.
So, all right, let's talk about last week.
Straight cash, homie.
How do you feel about, I don't know, like 1 yard?
My goodness.
That's not a lot to ask, right?
It's not. Or maybe just hold on to the football. It's not that much to ask. Simple job. Job security. Ball security is job security, as they say in New England. Just kidding. That was so painful for you, man. I feel so terrible. Like, I've had these weeks where you are a catch, a yard, not a fumble, away from the cash line. And it's like, man, I would just so much rather have just gotten destroyed.
Buried?
Just buried so that there's no hope. But like when you're hanging on and it's like 7:30 on the East Coast at night and you're waiting for that last game to wrap up and you're like, oh man, like that just happened. So I feel for you, brother. Why don't you tell the people what happened?
Yeah, it was a comedy of errors at the very end. My cash lineup was pretty chalky, and I think that's the part that I feel bad about. I'm more of a contrarian player where, like, in cash, I'm going to build the right way, and then I might have one piece. And so, one of the players that I kind of poo-pooed on all week was Dontavian Wicks, and of course, I played Dontavian Wicks in cash. Didn't play him in tournaments. That didn't help so much, but yes, I finished 0.1 points off the cash line. No big deal. If you had Jordan Whittington, I thought he was a great play. He dropped not one, but 2 receptions and then got knocked out of the game. That Jordan Mason fumble, man. Like, how did they lose that game? I was given the stats all week of like, I believe in their team implied total. They're going to win. They're at home. They're touchdown favorites. And it was kind of like going in that direction for the 49ers. And then it just didn't. So I wrote it up, if you want to, free on the website, my cash review article. I felt like the plays that were very obvious, Tucker Kraft and the Broncos D, hit. Like, if you played them, Tucker Kraft was 67%. The Broncos were 63%. You knew the field was going to do it, so just play them, and then, of course, they go off. But other than that, I felt like there's a lot of different wiggle room this past week.
Yeah, the biggest story for me was just how do you handle the Packers in cash? I know there was a lot of teams out there that people played 3 pass catchers from, I'm sorry, not the Rams, the Packers. Played 3 of them. Jaden Reed, Tucker Kraft, and then Dontavian Wicks, and they were all underpriced with the Romeo Doubs situation, the Christian Watson injury, and some people even played Jordan Love. So people came into cash with a Jordan Love triple stack, which if that hits, like, that's great. If it if it doesn't, if things go sideways a little bit, you're just asking for a lot of variance. So I was uneasy about that. I did not play that lineup. I played Purdy as well, same as you. Pittman came into play and Josh Downs, once we had the Anthony Richardson out news with Joe Flacco, which Flacco for president, man. I mean, that guy in fantasy is just so good. And then I thought one of the tougher decisions was like whether you spend down for Tyrone Tracy or Jordan Whittington. To me, that was kind of a decision point. It turns out they both were great, so it didn't really matter that much. But it was an interesting week in cash that it kind of felt like, how do you handle the Packers was the storyline for me. And I just felt uneasy about 3. So I played Reed and Kraft and pivoted there. So it was finally a good week for me. I mean, I've been getting crushed in cash this year. So I finally had a sweat-free week, and we'll see if it continues moving forward.
Yeah, I think the main takeaway for me is just to remind people that you're feeling out how the field is going to respond in double ups and who's going to be popular. So it did feel like a 3 running back build type of week. And I think the field did that. Now you can say like, oh, well, if everyone's going to do this, why do I just want to follow along? But I felt like the volume plays, like Jordan Mason got the volume. They were ahead. He looked like he was going to go in for a touchdown. That was interesting. Ken Walker was like painful. It was painful to watch that game, him not getting in the end zone, and then Zach Charbonnet get a bunch of like 2-minute drill type work towards the end. So that was painful. But I did, here's the crazy part. So I missed the cash line in double ups. But in my head-to-heads, I went 63%. And it's just a good reminder of if people just think like, oh, I had a bad week. It's like, oh, well, you can actually like insulate a lot of losses because other people are coming to these head-to-heads with just weird lineups. So I was kind of surprised. I was like, I didn't feel like I killed it. I don't know if I deserved to like cash at all, but to look at my head-to-heads and say, okay, 63% is an awesome week despite missing it. So just a good reminder for people, just make sure you look at your head-to-heads as well. You had a good head-to-head week, right?
I did, yeah. I think it was 76% this week, my best of the year. So fortunate for that. I think most weeks, if you're able to get somewhere around the 55 to 60% range, like you should feel awesome about that over the course of a season. Into the 70s and 80s might spike for a week. That's not sustainable. At the same time, too, if you've been stuck in like the 30 to 40% range, like you should expect some variance as long as you're playing smartly and playing the right way to bounce back here. So yeah, just remember the long view is kind of what we always preach on the show, where it's so easy to get stuck in the highs and the lows of a week, but we want to play with a season-long mindset of, we're building the bankroll for the entire year, not just 1 week.
Yes, and make sure you go into our Discord because so many people get to sharpen lineups. You don't want to blame people if things go wrong. You don't want to, say like, oh, well, these people talk to me. Like, I've found that a lot of times we want people to confirm our priors, but people are really good. I feel like in the Discord, they're kind and they want to like poke holes like, hey, man, do you think that's too many Packers? What if this goes wrong? Or, hey, you're playing this player. That's an interesting play. Is that for GPP or cash? And you can, kind of go back and forth with that. But we did have some great listeners who won big. This first one is from Jake. Said 3 for who? 3 for me. Thanks, Borg and Betz. Hashtag Chili's. Hashtag DFS. Looks like they got 6th in a tournament. Won $1,000 with a Burrow double stack. I was really happy for T. Higgins. Really happy that we did talk about Burrow double stacks. And then I also see in here a Darius Slayton, who was one of my dart throws. I felt great about the dart throws this past week. Alec Pierce and Darius Slayton from nowhere, from the back row, decided that they wanted to have monster games.
Alec Pierce, Kyle, is currently the wide receiver 15 in fantasy football. More top 12 weeks than Tyreek Hill. So, yeah, man, he's there. But we talked about just that game, and it's like, man, if Jonathan Taylor is out, which he was, and Anthony Richardson doesn't play, we should see a massive rate of pass attempts from Joe Flacco against that Jaguars secondary, which is just so bad. And it hit. So, yeah, man, that was really fun. If people played Alec Pierce, I didn't have the stones to do it. I'm not going to lie, because it's like,
oh, I played him, boy.
when will I ever
you bet I did.
Trust this and regret it? Oh, every time. But yeah, if you played him, that was awesome. I know Slayton was interesting just because of leverage off of either Tracy or some of the other cheap chalk. But yeah, man, this lineup was great. The Burrow doubles, the game script played out the exact way that you would hoped if you played a Burrow double. And they're just throwing so much in Cincy. And you can't run against the Ravens, and that's kind of how things play out. Now, we will have a very similar situation on the slate this week when the Cowboys go up against a run defense that you can't run on. So I hope Dak is just chucking this week. So Dak doubles are kind of the Burrow play for me early in the week.
Yep. And we got another one here from Ridiculous 1989. I'm going to let you read that one.
Yes, he says, the last 4 years, I'm usually depositing more money at this point because I'm stupid and go way too ham on GPPs.
I like the honesty.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Finally, I took your advice on bankroll management and focused on cash games. I haven't hit a big GPP yet, but I've min cashed in a lot of them. But thanks to focusing more on double ups and head-to-heads, I've already tripled my initial bankroll from week 1. Thanks for continuing to beat that drum. And this is what we talked about in the offseason. Like in August, we usually do a show talking about this concept that for me, we talked about cash games as like a stabilizer for your bankroll. Just stay alive, man. Like you'll have some small wins here and there. You might have a small loss here and there, but like keep your bankroll alive. And then all of a sudden you hit one in GPPs and your year is made. So that's kind of how I'm viewing it this year for cash games. And hopefully that big win is coming soon for Ridiculous and all of you out there.
Yeah. And also, like, I think people feel like, oh, it's cash, I'm just doubling my money, or, it's small wins. But it's like the game theory portion of cash doesn't just like get removed because you're not in this giant tournament and you might not win $100,000. It's like, no, like I'm still thinking about what the other people are going to do. Or, in the late window this past weekend, it was, man, there's a lot of plays that are going in the late window. And so you couldn't really lean on late swap like you wanted to in the past, because you had to realize my plays in the early window, if they weren't chalky and they didn't hit, then like I really got to pivot. But so just think about that. Like cash is giving you a way to play DFS that is great, and it builds on each other. Like it builds throughout the season. So we think it works really well, and we have some listeners too. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll move on to week 6. Got a lot of good feedback this past week about the Wendy's Super Bar portion of last week's broadcast.
Kyle, it's funny. At this point in my life, if you had asked me like what my career is or like what I'm doing for the society, it's not much. But the amount of people that connected with that over the weekend was just so good. Most of my DMs are usually start-sit questions, prop questions. This weekend, a lot of my DMs were people talking about the Super Bar and how good it was. And I'm like, man, you are my people. So what a silly game we play here on the show.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't like responding to start-sit stuff. It's like, just go to our website. I just start-sit. No, thank you. But Wendy's Super Bar, I pretty much will respond most of the time. Mighty Ducks, it gets almost 100% hit rate. If you want to talk to me about that, we can definitely talk about that.
State of the main slate.
Each week, we will be referring to the DraftKings Sportsbook line. It's where Betz and myself play. You can go to sportsbook.draftkings.com and play with us. Check in with a couple wagers here, Betz, because we had a good week with the props and another good week for Pick 6.
Dude, the Pick 6 was a sweat this week because at one point, you and I
never in doubt.
You and I were texting. I was like, yeah, Moss looks pretty safe. Okay, Amari went over, which Amari Cooper, my goodness, the unrealized air yards from Deshaun Watson are infinite.
My air yards lead, he's the
101 in your air yards league. So those hit for me. And I was okay, Kyle. You're about to go 2-0-2. Like I know it. And then you text me. You're like, Lamar, he went over 48.5 or whatever. I was like, I don't think that was the line. And then it was a sweat in the fourth quarter.
The line,
into overtime.
The line that I gave out was 54.5,
and he finished with 55.
55.
So
I mean, I don't even have the drop, so I'm terrible at my job.
You're so bad. So that was fun. Hopefully everybody tailed that. But yeah, the officials in the DFS pass went 5-3 this week. So we had regression hit us last week with a loss. This week we come back with a win. So that's always good. And just like in DFS, you can't get too high, you can't get too low in anything with betting. Make sure you're taking a long view here.
This week's slate is basically a rinse and repeat of what we did last week, right? Like we have 10 games on the main slate. We have the London game, the Jaguars and the Bears, and then we have teams on bye. So there is a healthy, 4 games on this slate that I was just like, okay, we're going to attack. We already see the totals. We really like them. How are you viewing this slate? Any different from last week or just in general? Like what's your kind of overview of how you're seeing this?
So it's very similar to last week where it's a 10-game slate. You've got a 5-5 split with 5 early, 5 late. The difference for me this week is that all of the chalk last week was in the late window, and like none of it was in the early window, except for like secondary chalk, like, you know, Derrick Henry and that kind of thing. But for the most part, this is kind of split up where you've got the Lions and the Cowboys in the late window. Atlanta, Carolina is interesting in the late window, but then you've got some early games that look really nice too, like Arizona and Green Bay, Washington and Baltimore are in the early window. So you can kind of split up your exposures there, which is nice. But there are teams on bye, of course, and like it's kind of some big hitters on bye, at least teams that, you know, that have playmakers that we like, with Kansas City, Miami, Minnesota, and the Rams. So it does set up interesting in that aspect. And then on top of that, the London game this week. And then we also have some pretty heavy hitters in the primetime games, like San Francisco, Seattle on Thursday night. There's no Joe Burrow this week with the Bengals. The Bills are on Monday night. So there's some teams that we like to play that aren't on the slate. So I think it could make for a pretty interesting slate in terms of how it goes.
I'm mad at the Bills
For losing that game?
It doesn't really bother me they lost. Like, I think the Texans deserve to win. It's just more of like, what are they doing? Like, what are they trying? What is Joe Brady trying to accomplish with this offense? Even the Keon Coleman touchdown, did you see the review of that where it's like he actually did step out?
Yeah, his heel might have hit out there. I also saw his route tree. I didn't watch a ton of that game because I didn't have a ton of exposure, but the route tree after the fact for Keon was so stale. It was all left side, pretty much go routes.
A stale tree, a stale bush.
Exactly. It was a stale route bush. But it's like, man, no Khalil Shakir. Like, let's get creative here. Yeah, they were not very creative on offense.
I mean, I called out Josh Allen as my slate breaker, and I was like, the game flow was like, he has to be Superman. Like, it really was set up for him just to go ham. He did not go ham, the narrator said. It did not work out so well. But yeah, he's off the slate this week. We do have 3 games that are approaching 50. So Detroit at Dallas is at 52.5 right now. Washington at Baltimore is at 52.5. I was kind of shocked that line was that high. And then Green Bay at Arizona is right now at 49.5. So 3 games that are above the rest. And then Falcons at Carolina is at 47.5. A little worried about that line. Once again, I think that's too high. But give me the teams with the highest team implied totals.
Yeah, so leading the way in that 52.5 point game is the Ravens at 29.5, Detroit 27.8, Green Bay 27.3, the Falcons 26.8 after Kirk Cousins just explosion on Thursday Night Football, and then the Eagles at 26.
I realized that I didn't even get to really celebrate with you.
I know.
Because we recorded the podcast. I had the time of my life. You know.
Were you swag surfing with Kirk?
Oh, man. I was beyond swag surfing. The next day, I only played that song, Swag Surfing, while doing work.
Just on repeat.
I'm dead serious. I really did do that. My wife eventually goes, stop.
That game was so fun to watch. You and I talked about it, not on the show, but after the fact, it was just so fun to watch. Yeah, it was wild, man. It was wild.
I mean, Kirk just sitting in the pocket. Like, we know he's not going to roll out. It's just Kirk just planting that back foot and just saying, I'm going to throw to open space. Darnell Mooney. Can I at least just have one little moment to say Darnell Mooney is an good NFL wide receiver. I won't say great. He's a good NFL wide receiver, and I think he fits what this team needs. Just someone who gets open in space and can stretch the field.
Yeah, and, as your friend, I may have told you that spending all of your hard-earned dollars on Darnell Mooney and best ball this year wasn't the most wise decision, but who's laughing now, Kyle? You're dunking on me on that one. I do have one question on Kirk Cousins. Did he go under his 21.5 completions, or where did he land on that?
He did not.
He had 21.5, and people in Discord or on Twitter were like, dude. I was like, yep, didn't see this coming. So Kirk just dunked on us.
Yeah, I mean, 509 was not what we thought he would throw for.
Nope.
Anyway, what a game. It was so fun. The next day I was just beaming. Kirk is like all Atlanta vibes too. I don't know if you saw the video of like him outside of a Waffle House.
I did.
Like that's ATL stuff. Anyway, which game do you feel like this week is going to be the most popular to stack?
Yeah, I'm looking at this Detroit and Dallas game, and it looks pretty appetizing. Obviously, the total is there at 52.5. It's a tight spread with Detroit favored by 3. Detroit comes out of their bye week. It's in a dome. You can't run in Detroit, so Dak should be chucking here, and it's such an awesome game environment that I really want to get exposure to. So Detroit, Dallas for me looks really exciting this week.
Okay, so with Washington, Baltimore, the narrative for this game is so strong. Like with Daniels and Lamar, you have two quarterbacks who essentially are kind of the same player. And I do think this total's been bet up to a pretty interesting amount. Washington's defense has improved the last couple of weeks. Like we saw a pass rush, albeit against Deshaun Watson this past week. My only issue about this game from afar, because people are going to want to stack it, they're the two most expensive quarterbacks when we get to salary standouts. Like, oh, these are the dudes. The passing options are really hard to figure out. It's like Terry McLaurin and I don't know. Like, do you go Diami Brown? Do you really want to play Zach Ertz in a tournament?
Never.
And feel good about it? Eckler's interesting, and then the Ravens have 38 tight ends, and they're not named Mark Andrews, who is 3,900.
Oh, so he's now a punt option.
He is. No, I started to categorize our tight ends. I was like, oh man, like, is Cade Otton a better play? Like, this is where we're at.
That was okay. So you did play him in a tournament last week. I chickened out. I was like, I can't do this.
You're not wrong.
And Charlie Kohler up the seam, 54-yard catch. I was like, oh baby, here we go, Mark Andrews. Kohler stands up with what is the weird helmet they have this year with like the thing on the top? You know what I'm talking about? That like extends out.
Yeah.
Anyway, he stood up with his stupid helmet, and I saw it, and I was like, that's not Mark Andrews.
Stupid Charlie.
Charlie, get out of here, dude. And then Isaiah Likely touchdown. So hits just keep coming, baby.
Charlie Kohler was actually a pretty good tight end prospect, Iowa State, I believe. I remember like in our scouting a couple years ago, I was like, he's kind of interesting. And then he goes there. It's like, who cares? But yeah, tight end one, apparently. Him and Likely.
So
running ahead of Andrews.
Yeah, that's just, it's the worst. But on this game, you mentioned like it's kind of hard to figure out the pass catchers. I think if you're playing a Lamar or a Daniels team, I think you're just playing the rushing side of it and you're stacking them with Terry, and then it goes through there, or Zay, and that's kind of all I have interest in personally.
Are you playing running backs against the Ravens?
No.
That's what I'm saying. Like it to me, then it would just stack up where you go like, well, Daniels, McLaurin, and then maybe Henry on the other side, or it just feels like a game where I wish there was a more condensed target tree or target share for the Ravens where I could go like, this is the dude. I will say Rashad Bateman was somebody I wrote up as interesting. His price is really cheap compared to a lot of other dudes. Saw 8 targets last week. Interesting. Just throwing out Rashad Bateman. He's never hurt us before either.
Rashad Bateman, man. It was nice to see him have a good game this past weekend. Yeah, that game was wild, man. So yeah, he's interesting actually, especially as like a cheap dart throw in this game, which we'll see what projections say, but maybe late in the week, he's the guy we bring up.
Yeah, I mean, we brought him up now, so we get credit.
Right.
If he does good, we don't even have to mention it again.
That's how it works.
All right, give me a game that's going to be sneaky this week.
So I kind of like this Atlanta-Carolina game. I know you're always skeptical of your Falcons for obvious reasons, but 47.5 total, that's nice. The pass rate should spike for Carolina again this week against Atlanta after, they just get shredded by Baker Mayfield. I mean, everyone gets shredded by Baker Mayfield, but you can throw a little bit on Atlanta. Carolina can't stop anybody, right? So I just think this game could go back and forth. I know that the team total was a little eye-opening. Like when I saw it, I was like, whoa, that's a lot for the Falcons. Because historically, like they're kind of down like the 23 range-ish, right? But the market's on it, so I don't want to overthink it. I think Atlanta-Carolina could be sneaky.
I'm checking back in on my survivor pool because took the Bears, could not have felt smarter. They rolled against the Panthers. And then I was like, man, do I go right back to just picking on the Panthers? And it's like, I can't pick the Falcons.
As soon as you trust the Falcons, they're going to let you down.
Eventually, I'm going to get to the week where I have 3 teams left to pick from. And I'm like, oh God, I got to pick the Falcons this week.
Yeah.
So I want to get your thoughts. Speaking of our teams. So Cleveland at Philadelphia, the Eagles are 8.5 point home favorites. That's a pretty big line. And I know they're coming off the bye. Kevin Stefanski, head coach of the Browns, said, quote, "We're not changing quarterbacks. We need to play better. I need to coach better." Don't know about you, but it's been really, really bad. But I feel like this sets up well for another Amari Cooper game. So I think this game could be sneaky. The Browns have also given up a ton on the ground. So Saquon's going to be a player we bring up in salary standards as His usage is awesome. He's expensive. But anyway, what are your thoughts on this game? And they should have the band back together with Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown.
Yeah, those two guys should be back, as should right tackle Lane Johnson. He missed their game before the bye against the Bucs, and they just imploded, which was so obvious. But yeah, you get the time to prepare out of the bye week. I think the Eagles can have success here. It's just, like, when is it going to happen for Deshaun Watson and the Browns? Like, I played Watson a couple of times last week because I was like, okay, Commanders, like, this game should shoot out. It should go back and forth. The Washington Commanders did their side of the deal. Cleveland, I think Deshaun is just broken, man. So even though the matchup is there, I just don't know if I can do it. Now, I will say, have you seen his price this week? He is
who? Deshaun Watson?
5,100, which is cheaper than some quarterbacks who won't take a snap this week.
Cheaper than Dalton.
I mean, I guess it's okay in terms of the value in a tournament, but 17.5 points implied for the Browns this week tells you a lot about how the market feels about Deshaun Watson. I just think he's broken. So, yeah, could you play an Amari one-off or whatever? Sure. But I just think it's over for Deshaun.
I feel like we need to have an honest conversation. Like, can you win a DFS tournament just based on value? Just the value of, a value lineup.
Dude, I was so mad at Trevor Lawrence. I mean, they play pretty well, all things considered, but that value stack, obviously I was on Brian Thomas Jr. a ton. I doubled him with Christian Kirk, who did nothing until the fourth quarter, but then it's just Tank Bigsby stealing the show. So I think I'm at a point with some of these quarterbacks where I'm like, man, this is so cheap. Like, this could really work. And it doesn't work. And it feels like that's how Lawrence is, and that's how Deshaun Watson is. And, eventually I'll learn, but I'm a sicko, so maybe I'll play it.
There's like we talked about last week, there's a certain point with value where it's not good. And that's what they did. That's what corporate Wendy's said, is they said $2.99 for a super bar. That's not sustainable.
That's basically the equivalent of us in the DFS pass for 5 years straight, not changing the price. It's like,
they had your
terrible business decision, but hey, $2.99 for that super bar was everything.
Yeah, and if you don't have DFS pass, let's just say this once again. Not only does it pay for itself over and over and over again, which is a wild thought that we're giving a product that eventually just you make money off it, but the value of getting to hang around people like you and I mean, that is...
Oh, you can't put a price tag on that.
I know, they haven't even upped the price. They don't realize the value that we bring. So, you brought up Atlanta, Carolina. I brought up Cleveland, Philadelphia. Sneaky games, but also we're a little skeptical of both of our teams. Which game do you want to be underweight on this next week?
So we just got news during recording that Antonio Pierce is telling reporters that he's still evaluating who the quarterback is going to be this week, and they're going to have a competition in practice.
AKA, I don't know, they both suck.
When is the last time, if ever, you've seen a quarterback competition mid-season? I mean, of course that happens in training camp, right, every year for a couple teams. But so you got that going on, and you've got TJ Watt on the other side. No thank you. And, Pittsburgh, I think it's possible we could see a Pickens game here. We could see a Field spike week game. But the total is just so low, 36.5. Both these teams play slow. They want to run the ball. It's just not a game environment I think I want.
Yeah, you said earlier this offseason, multiple times, you're like, Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell, they're the same dude.
Exact same.
They're exact same, doesn't matter. You feel a little bit better about your Raiders under. That's looking a little bit better.
Yeah, the Raiders, I feel like I have this personal thing with the Raiders, where it's like 1 week I'm like, okay, they rallied around Antonio Pierce. This is great. The next week, Devonta Adams out of nowhere hates this team and now wants to be gone. And the punting and the business decisions comment, it's just bad vibes. And generally with those sort of teams, it doesn't get better as the year goes on. Now they don't have a quarterback that they can really trust.
All right. I don't really want a huge part of Tampa Bay, New Orleans. We still have to figure out with Derek Carr how that goes. The line went before Monday night, New Orleans -2. Now it's Tampa Bay -2. The game's in New Orleans. Is just setting up to be a gross game. These teams are bottom 5 in pace of play in terms of seconds per play. They play slow. You saw Monday night, it was just a drag. And man, as a Chris Olave manager, there's so much pain involved. So much pain. By the way, in a Dynasty League bets, I won by 0.06. I needed Chris Olave to get 2 points. He got 2 points. Exactly.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that was painful. I mean, Rashid Shaheed is legit. And his role is he's seen over 50% of their air yards. So he's interesting this week. He's cheap, obviously, with the Monday night discount, but yeah, the Olave stuff is quite frustrating.
Also, props to you. Speaking of taking Kamara's under on Monday night, I mean, that felt like a lock right at halftime.
The Chiefs' run defense is great. The Saints, that's the other thing with the Saints is they've had some major offensive line issues that they've kind of been able to get by with, and the injuries, I think, snuck up on them. And when you play Chris Jones, like that's going to happen on the road in Arrowhead, obviously very, very tough spot to play.
All right, which team are you most confident hits their over this week?
So I haven't backed this team a lot this year, but how about the Titans coming out of their bye week?
What?
We need 3 touchdowns, Kyle. Okay, can Will Levis and the boys do it? I'm not sure, but this is a good spot. I mean,
is it good that he's prepared?
So we'll see if he plays. I think this is one of those situations where, from my standpoint, I think he is going to be healthy enough to play, but could they use it as an excuse to say, oh, he's not ready, let's see what Mason Rudolph could do? Maybe. I'm not sure that changes how I feel about it, but just this Indy defense they're so bad, man. They're so bad. They've got major injury issues going on right now. We've talked about their cornerback play has been struggling. Their top corner, Juju Brent's still not going to play this week. Their slot corner, Kenny Moore, is still out. Kwity Paye is out. So they've got major issues there. And then, Tennessee coming out of the bye week, you can run on Indy. Like, I just think it's a good spot for some of their pass catchers as well, with Ridley and Hopkins, who are cheap in DFS, by the way. Indy has allowed 3 of 5 teams to hit their team total this year. So I'm back in Tennessee this week at home, 21 points.
All right, this game is the London game, so it's not on the main slate, but I really like what Chicago's doing. Their team implied total is just 23. They're facing the Jags, who are allowing 29 points per game, 30th in the NFL. Chicago's covered the spread 4 out of 5 weeks. Their defense has been lights out. They haven't let any of their opponents hit their team implied total. And the thing about Chicago is they're playing pretty fast. 5th in plays per game, 7th in seconds per play, and 2nd in no huddle rate. So with Caleb Williams, it is a dice roll a lot of the times, but you're kind of see some of these performances where if they're favored, and in this one they're facing a bad defense, I think it's a team that you can lean into. That's probably more for showdown purposes, or if you just want to believe in the Bears. But I was going through this week, I was like, I feel like the Bears have turned the corner in the last couple of weeks where they've started to figure it out. Keenan Allen, don't know if he's turned the corner. That's okay. We can move on from that. Which team are you most confident hits the under of their team implied total?
Yeah, in that same game, last week was such an obvious spot to go to the Jaguars, especially in DFS. This week, it's not. 21.5 points is a tall task against a Bears defense that has been awesome. They're allowing 17 points per game. That is 5th. They are 4th in EPA per play. They're 5th in success rate. All 5 of their opponents have gone under their team total so far this year. So I don't trust Trevor against the Chicago secondary. I am backing the Bears defense here in this spot. So give me under Jacksonville, 21.5 points.
I said earlier that I'm not really interested in New Orleans. Their team implied total is at 20.3 the last 3 weeks. So remember those first 2 weeks, they blew things out of the water. So it skews their season-long numbers. Last 3 weeks, 30th in points per game, 28th in plays. They just are slow. They're boring. And other than Shaheed, it's like really hard to see where this team can have big plays. So I think New Orleans is a team that I'm going to stay away from, even though they are at home. So no thank you for them.
Salary standouts.
It's early in the week. It's Tuesday. Just got done with some pickleball. And we're going to talk about salary standouts.
That's a lovely morning.
It was a good morning, man. Like, feels really great. I'm a big fan of fall in the South.
Oh, the fall's the best.
Arizona didn't have seasons.
Just hot.
It was just like one of those things. Like, what do I tell my kids? Like, they learning this stuff in school. It's like, nope, you don't get that.
Nope. That's why you had to move home.
Not happen at all. Yep, home's great. All right, so salary standouts early in the week. These are some people just to think about, file away. I'll even give some GPP thoughts as well. At quarterback, the high-priced guys are Lamar Jackson at 7.8 and Jaden Daniels at 7.3 in the same game. How are you sorting out those two? Obviously, we get to save $500 going down to Jaden, and his scramble rate is essentially like breaking all of my spreadsheets because right now he's on pace for over 100 scrambles on the season. The previous record was Justin Fields with 70 a couple years ago. And by the way, a scramble is just worth an insane amount. Like league average is 7 yards a carry on a scramble. So if he's getting like 6, 7 of those a game. It's just off the charts. So how are you sorting out those two mobile quarterbacks?
Yeah, that's a really good point on just the team success level. Like if a play breaks down and you've got, I don't know, Derek Carr or Phillip Rivers of old, or, whoever was the last couple of years, statue quarterbacks, if it breaks down, the play's over, or you throw it away, like there's no coming back from it. What Lamar and Jaden Daniels, like they just keep plays alive. Those 4, 5, 6 yards you pick up on a scramble turns second and long into, second and short, and then you can run and set up third and manageable, Kyle. It's great. But it does so much for the play success and team level success. So I like this game. So I like both guys. Obviously the $500 savings is big time on Jaden Daniels. I feel like I just want to lean into the team total though with the Ravens. They have a massive team total. So whether it's Derrick Henry or Lamar, like I feel more confident with that. But no doubt I'll have exposure to both guys this week in tournaments.
Yeah, if you look at Washington's pass rate and you're like, oh man, like I just don't think they throw the ball enough. It's like part of that is skewed because if you look at his drop back rate, you have to actually add in the scramble. So when you look at somebody like Jaden Daniels or Lamar Jackson and you see that their overall volume is down, look at, stats like dropbacks, because you add those in, you realize this team was trying to throw the ball and then things just open up. So scrambles are undesigned runs. And I think early in the week, I probably lean towards Lamar. I just think do you have some worry that this team on the road is going to pumpkin? I feel like the offense at some point is going to be stale. Not Jaden, but like some of the other playmakers.
Yeah, I think at some point. I mean, they've just run so pure in the first month of the season that at some point they'll have a down game. Now, after watching what Burrow and company just did to the secondary, I'm not sure this is the week. But you could also argue, look, like these defenses know they face these types of quarterbacks. Like the Baltimore defense faces Lamar every day in practice, right? And vice versa with Washington. So maybe they kind of have a read on how to stop these scrambling quarterbacks that you could see it come that way. But I don't want to overthink this one this week. I think that day will come for Washington, but I'm gonna lean into what we've seen and just how efficient they've been.
There's a bunch of guys in the 6K range that I feel like you're going to be able to play in tournaments, like Jordan Love, Kyler Murray, like that in that same game. Like I'm going to be playing probably tournament stacks with those guys. Dak is in a good spot at 6.7 at home. We love Dak because you're going to get passing volume, and it's a matchup where at the end of the day, you're like, okay, they're not going to be able to run the ball. I feel like right now, if you made me pick between Dak and Lamar, I'm probably going to get the savings with Dak and figure out another way to get in that team implied total of the Ravens. But yeah, any other guys you want to talk about?
Yeah, I also think Jordan Love too in that game against the Cardinals is super interesting. 6,600. The price is right. There's a lot of great quarterback plays on this slate, and I think for me, it's kind of like the top tier with Lamar and Jaden Daniels. You dip down into that 6K range, like you talked about with Kyler, Dak, Jordan Love. Really interesting. Even Jared Goff maybe in a tournament. So there's a lot of really strong plays there. And then I did just want to mention, I know I mentioned it briefly at the top, but if you scroll and then you keep scrolling and then you get tendonitis in your finger, you will notice Deshaun Watson at $5,100, who is $100 more than Malik Willis, who is the same price as Jameis Winston, and who is cheaper than Michael Penix. So that's where we're at, and also cheaper than Russ. That's where we're at with Deshaun Watson. So how bad could it be?
Thoughts on Andy Dalton at 5.2 against the Falcons?
Yeah, in a tournament, I think, like I said, I think that game is sneaky. So yeah, for GPPs, he's on my radar early in the week.
Like you could say he's the value play. He's the volume play. Like this is like you're getting a ton of nuggets for 99 cents.
That's like, what would be the best, especially when I was a chunky kid, when you order, whatever the amount is that comes in the normal order size, and you're like, oh, a couple fell out of the thing. Like I got a couple extra in the bottom of the bag. I mean, that could be Andy Dalton this week. The extra nuggets in the bottom of the bag. You know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm just trying to think like Andy Dalton. He's like, is that disrespectful?
No. It's a good point. It's like a little present.
Because he's a treasure now.
That's what I'm saying.
Him and Flacco are treasures.
That's what I'm saying, man.
Okay. All right. Well, I wish the game was at Atlanta in a dome. That'd be my only thing.
I mean, I wouldn't want that for Carolina because you can't go into that stadium and win. But because it's in Carolina, now I have hope for the Panthers.
I want to take the Falcons, but let's take a quick break and then we'll move on to running backs. All right, moving on to running backs. These are our salary standouts early in the week for week 6. I have Saquon Barkley at 8.2. It's a hefty price tag that you have to pay, but the volume is unreal. He's also rested. I wonder what Saquon did during bye. Rested those quads. Feeling great. So I think Saquon's just an easy, if you just want the volume, you want to go there, that's fine. The Lions running backs are interesting because the Cowboys have been a run funnel. Jahmyr Gibbs at 7K. Monty is at 6.5. They're also coming off the bye. I just feel like I'm always trying to figure out, is there a ceiling outcome for these players? Or for cash, you just kind of say, hey, I know that these dudes are going to get touchdowns, and, I'm just going to lean into that.
Yeah, I think, so my early take is I'm always weary of these guys if they're both active and healthy in cash because it's hard to say, is it going to be Monty when they get to the 5-yard line? They're giving Gibbs those touches now too. Obviously, you see more pass down usage with Gibbs, so they both have their pros and cons, but it's such a good game environment that I think for me right now, I'm probably going to reserve them for tournaments. We'll see. My early take is, I know Monty's been great and they love him, but early in the year, do you remember in August, there was continued reports about they have this vision for Gibbs and, making this second year leap and getting so much more usage in the pass game and all these things. And then you had the injuries in camp and it kind of was a slow start. Coming out of the bye week, I just want to be early on if that is a reality. And I think the field will see this and say, oh, I can just save $500. Just give me Montgomery in that game. I'll play him instead. So that's my take. I really like Gibbs this week in the up-tempo game environment in a dome.
All right, so talk me out of this, because it's another Falcons take, but I feel like Bijan Robinson is now priced at a point at 6.6 where we have to figure out, I wish I got more volume, but the Panthers are dead last in schedule adjusted points allowed to running backs. So I feel like he's at the price point now where it's this is Cashville.
Yeah, 6.6 is quite cheap for a player that, a month ago we were drafting in the first round of redraft leagues. Now, I will say, Tyler Algier this team likes him, right? I mean, you know that, obviously. So he's going to get his touches, but I think the matchup is just so good that it might not matter as much. So I think Bijan is really interesting this week. The other thing on Bijan, they downplayed it and he downplayed it, but 2 weeks ago, he was on the injury report with a shoulder. Last week on a short week, he was on the injury report with the hamstring. I just wonder if that was more of a factor than anything. So if we get positive news on those fronts, if he's not on the injury report this week, then Bijan looks so strong. It's just in the matchup. It's just too good.
Yeah, I feel like it just makes a lot of sense that this is a good rebound spot. The other cheap guys this week, Tony Pollard. If you like him for tournaments, Betz apparently likes the Titans this week. It is the Colts. It's a good matchup. He's at 6K. Austin Eckler stood out to me at 5.6. Is Brian Robinson banged up? Because I know he got his 2 touchdowns this past week, but I feel like his usage, I know they were blowing them out, but I feel like he's still a little banged up.
Yeah, he was on the injury report with a knee issue. Actually didn't practice until Friday last week. And in fantasy, it was great because he was in the end zone twice. He had 7 carries for 18 yards, only played 34% of the snaps. So yes, he is not quite at 100%.
Okay. Any other names? Josh Jacobs, we talked about that game earlier. Josh Jacobs last week kind of proved hey, I am the dude. Emmanuel Wilson kind of aided in that workload for a while, but he's a good price point at 6.7, 7.6 on FanDuel. I see you have Tyrone Tracy on here if you're playing on FanDuel. He was your boy this past week. I just want to throw out there, I don't think their plan was to use him the same way. And then Eric Gray fumbled at the goal line, and then they bring in Tracy. Eric Gray was really good on the first drive, caught a bunch of passes, fumbled there, and then it was Tracy. So that's just my take.
Yeah, I think that's possible. And obviously this is a moot point if Devin Singletary is back, but he was just so good in that game that I don't know that they can go back the other direction. So monitor what's going on in New York, but I just want to point out the matchup is obviously there against the Bengals, and he's dirt cheap at 5,800 on Sunday Night Football.
At wide receiver, I think it's pretty open this week. Amon-Ra stood out to me at 8.1 as the expensive guy that I'm in cash, I'm going to play him against the Cowboys. You can go right back to the Packers if you want to. Jaden Reed is 7K. I looked this up. This is the most expensive he's ever been in his career. but the dude just keeps being efficient. I mean, that downfield catch, not only was it improbable, but like, what the heck were the Rams secondary doing? Like, on that play, I'm just looking at like, everyone just stood around and no one went after the ball, and then Jaden Reed makes this crazy catch. But Jaden Reed and Mon-Ra are the ones that stood out to me a ton. And then there's a bunch of 5K guys I feel like will be in cash consideration. Darnell Mooney, after what he did this past week, 5.3. Jalen Tolbert will be another name that people will go look at this past week. He caught a touchdown. He's 5K. So those are the guys early in the week that like I feel like are going to get some cash consideration.
Rashid Shaheed as well. Super strong role this past week, 5,600. Taking on the Bucks. Obviously, we just saw what Kirk Cousins did to that defense. So they're interesting. I think for tournaments, I really like Ridley. I've been just, perimeter wide receivers against the Colts. That's sort of my thing this year. Ridley is that guy. Hopkins is also cheap and a good matchup at 5,100. So there's a lot of strong plays in the mid-range this week as well. I did also want to note Deontay Johnson looks quite strong at 6,100 for cash. How do you feel? We didn't talk about this game. How do you feel about Tank Dell? I don't think Nico plays. He's our boy. He's 6,200. So it's not necessarily cheap per se, but relative to Diggs, who's 7,400, he is a discount.
I'm at the point now where I don't know what to do with Tank Dell.
Cool.
Like, I need an intervention because I'm going to keep playing him in my season-long leagues. And in my best ball teams, it doesn't look good at all that I've leaned on Tank Dell as like a wide receiver 3. So I'm biased. I don't want any part right now.
Okay. We'll see.
It's not cheap enough, man.
It's also the Patriots
and paying up.
What is the total? Like 37.5 or something. So it's not the best environment.
All right. Can I give you some punt names?
Oh, please.
Because I actually do think there are a couple wide receivers this week that you could pay down and kind of look at. Like under 5K is where I'm. Is that like the new punt-ish territory for wide receivers? Is like 4,500 or below?
I think so. I mean, it used to be like 3,200, but now, this is what DraftKings has done to us.
All right, Diami Brown. I definitely couldn't play him in cash, but he's going to be interesting because we talked about the game. He's only 4K. And then sneaky Jalen Polk, 3.6.
My boy.
Led the team in routes run, had a touchdown called back, 6 targets this past week. Ignore the part that he only caught one of them, but I think he's a punt play. Like he's in consideration for me right now in cash.
I mean, I like it. His snap counts early in the year were, in the 50-60% range. The last couple of weeks, it's trended up 83% of the snaps, 100% of the snaps this past week. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. Now, the Patriots are projected to score about 15 points this week. So it's still one of those that I'm like, come on, man. But if you need 7, 8, 9 points from this cheap salary, like that can certainly work. So yeah, I think he's in consideration.
All right, let's go to tight end. Brock Bowers is a monster. We were talking earlier and poo-pooing all over the Raiders. Then you go, man, Brock Bowers is just fun. He just went to the wrong team, but maybe he's just going to see insane usage the rest of the year. He's 6K, so it's expensive, but he's just been awesome. Tucker Kraft. This is where we're at now. 4.8 right now. He gets a healthy price bump right now. It's a game that we're going to talk about, but it's a little bit more expensive. Mark Andrews, 3.9. Just have to mention it. Our weekly opportunity just to say that you can buy in now. Our prices have never been lower.
Buttlicker, our prices have never been lower. Oh my goodness. Yeah, he is he's $700 more than Elijah Higgins. So that's where we're at.
That's such a great scene in The Office. Like, I like it when Michael's like convinced that they made a sale.
Yeah, it's so good.
I play this little. Did I mention this before on the podcast? That one of my friends. This is a great Office reference. One of my friends lives right down the street from me. And so before turning my neighborhood, I actually go right by their house, and you can actually see from the road like their TV. Like you can see inside their house. So I get this like little 1.5 second where I drive by their house and I can tell what they're watching for just a second. And right now they're going through The Office. And so every once in a while when I see it, I will text him and try to guess the episode.
Okay, so your friend knows this is happening.
Yeah.
I was going to say, because you sound like a creep right now.
Oh, it could be totally creepy, but no, he's like, I've been right like 1 or 2 times, but you could just tell like, oh, Michael's in an interview or Jim's in an interview. It's my new favorite game.
That's great.
when I'm driving home.
I love it.
So Mark Andrews 3.9, Juwan Johnson 3.1. It's fine, I guess. I don't really like the game, but I mean, if you're punting in cash, he's cheap.
Yeah, 3,100 coming off a game where he saw 5 targets last night against the Chiefs. You know, his role early in the year was nothing, right? Recovering from the foot surgery this past spring. You still got the Taysom Hill injury. So I think it makes a lot of sense if you're looking for a true punt. I mean, there aren't many guys that are cheaper that are playable. So if you do want to just punt it off the bridge, I think Juwan Johnson is the guy.
All right, defense. Last week was really easy. We talked about the Broncos on Tuesday, Friday, played the Broncos. It was great. This week, it's a little tougher. The Titans are a team that are priced great. Does it change if it's Richardson or Flacco for you? They're 2.8.
So I think obviously you would change how you view the defense. Like if it's Flacco and you want to play a Flacco stack, obviously you're not playing the Titans. But if you did want to just talk about it from cash, I think they're a good play no matter what, because you either get Richardson banged up who will make mistakes, or you get Flacco who's just going to chuck and just gives you more opportunities for sacks, turnovers, takeaways, that kind of thing. Titans defense has been awesome. Now they did have one game against the Dolphins that kind of skews a little bit of this data, but they're number 1 right now in success rate allowed. They're 5th in EPA per play. Like they've been really, really good. So the Titans at 2.8 make a ton of sense.
And they're rested.
And the Colts just had a couple of offensive line injuries too.
Tighten up, man.
That's what I'm saying.
I like it. The Saints are 2.7 at home. If you want to play them, that's cheap. That's fine. Any interest in the Ravens? I know they're 3K. I feel like it's a good price point, but like in tournaments, do you feel like that's like a good leverage point?
Yeah, if you did just want to say this game hits the under and all the production goes through Henry and the Ravens dominate, like a correlation play with King Henry and Baltimore's defense, I mean, they're favored by a ton, right? So like that makes a lot of sense to me for tournaments.
All right. Your Eagles are a little bit more expensive, but they are playing a guy named Deshaun Watson, and he isn't that great at football anymore. I believe the stat, I'm going to say it, that was just directed to me. Deshaun Watson has settled more lawsuits than touchdown passes since he was traded to the Browns.
I have no words. I mean, it's over.
It's not good. So, yeah, that should do it. Make sure you check back in later on in the week. We will have our DraftKings picks, our FanDuel picks, and you can play with us. Go to ballersdfs.com. It will direct you to our DraftKings League, Fantasy Footballers DFS, Borg, and Betz. This Thursday night is the 49ers and Seahawks. Still dumbfounded how the 49ers lost last week, and that division is just poo-poo right now. Like, it's just like so bad, anybody can actually win it. I think the 49ers will like right the ship, but anyway, you're going to open up a contest for that Thursday, right?
I'll open up a contest for that, and then I'll have the article up Thursday morning for the top plays for me for captain, flex, tournament ideas, stuff like that. So yeah, that'll be in the DFS Pass on Thursday morning.
All right. That's going to do it for us. I will see you guys next week, and it'll be glorious.
Dude, I'm just going to be grinding late in the week. Kyle's going to have his toes in the sand, a drink in his hand, living his best life. But I'll be back Friday for you guys with Pete Overzet. Should be a great show. Get you ready for the Week 6 main slate. Have a great week. We will see you on Friday.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast. Don't forget to visit us on the web at thefantasyfootballers.com.